In regards to this question about whether Christianity is part of a cult or will make you be part of a cult, I actually think there's parts of Christianity, and I'm an atheist saying this, I think there's parts of Christianity, there's messages in the Bible and there's messages from Christian leaders that can help people not be part of a cult. Okay, so I was raised Southern Baptist. I was raised in a great church community. My church was very nice. There wasn't any abuse or anything like that. So yeah, raised as a kid like that. So it was almost like a second family. And they even still treat me like a family. I can bring my family to Wednesday night suppers. We live in Arizona now, but I was raised in Georgia. And if we go visit my family, visit my parents in Georgia, I can take my family to the church and have a Wednesday night supper with the same people that I grew up with. And my youth pastor gave me a book by J.P. Moreland called Scaling the Secular City. And he later wished that he hadn't done that. But he didn't really understand apologetics. He was raised under the framework of, don't ask questions, or if you could ask a question, then you got the answer and you were done. There was no follow-up. And it wasn't brutal. It was just how they were raised. It was, this is the truth, and what part of God says so don't you understand? And I understand apologists now cringe at that. And I'm sure there have been Christian scholars, across history that cringe at that. But it was a popular mindset. Sometimes it still is. And it happens everywhere. It happens, even outside of religion. But anyway, so when I read Scaling the Secular City, I liked that, but my youth pastor didn't like it because it did encourage asking questions and researching, and his view was that you could talk yourself out of it. And to this day, he'll say, look what happened. He talked himself out of it.
Sure.
But I could just get the sense of, okay, this isn't welcome anymore. So I just stopped asking questions because, at some point, it's not comfortable for them. So I started to think, what if this is something that people just do to themselves, where they think that, this has to be the answer, I'm going to go with it, rather than something that's true. And that was kind of the seeds that planted my doubt. And so from my late teens to my early 20s, I started walking away, so that probably by the time I was in my mid-20s, I was full on, it's all made up.
The question that James wanted to talk about is something like, does Christianity lead to cultic mind control? Now, some of our listeners may be going, well, who's Richard to be talking about cultic mind control? But Richard, it seems like your military occupational skill when you were in the Marines and what you currently do now as a government employee, as a civilian, is related to this very topic. So
yes.
As much as you can, why don't you give us some background in your military and currently professional career field and how this is informing our discussion today?
Sure. For almost 30 years now, I've worked in the counterterrorism industry, and I focus on radicalization. And when I say the word radicalization or radical, that's not necessarily a bad word, because you can be a radical for good things. But I focus on the radicalization that leads towards dehumanization. And dehumanization just means this other culture over here, they're not really people. So whenever people talk about killing like entire cultures or wiping out entire lineages, at that point in their mind, they're not thinking of them as humans. They're thinking of them as like viruses or, some sort of a sickness or some sort of disease that needs to be cleaned. So in their minds, they're thinking, I'm cleaning. I'm not hurting people. I'm actually making the world better, because wouldn't the world be better without, disease? So that's how people see it. And so I've really spent maybe, 30 years in counterterrorism, 10 of that was in the Marines. But I would say the last 15 or so have really been studying the academics. So like my post-grad degrees all came after the Marines, focusing specifically on the neurology and the sociology and, of this radicalization towards dehumanization. Cults who say we've got to wipe people out and we need to clean up in order to be in good standing with this higher power. I study how that happens. And by the way, that's not just religious. There's non-religious, and believe me, I know we've listened and heard the guys make their pitch, and sometimes the pitch is we need to get rid of religion, however that happens. And, so it's not about religion; it's about humanity that would make people think like that.
In the context of what we're discussing, the question of cultic mindsets, it's obvious that cults use and manipulate, twist, and distort history and then I offered you to your insight on that. What do you think about the historical, how cults and a cultic mindset looks at history, and then we'll talk about how you view what a cultic mindset is.
I like to use the metaphor of songbirds, because when a songbird is born, he's going to grow up and he's going to sing the song that the other adults in the community teach him. And I know some of you are like, oh, you're saying religion dooms you, but I'm not saying that. But that songbird is going to sing that song, and he's biologically programmed to grow up to sing that song. As a baby, he has no idea what you're talking about. If you could somehow talk to him, he'd say, what song are you talking about? Where's my mom? Why is it called? But at some point, he is going to sing that song. He's going to hear it from the other adults. They're going to teach him, and he's going to sing it. So what happens is that song, which is immaterial but does exist, is out there kind of waiting on that bird to grow up. And the bird grows up and sings it, teaches it to the other birds. And so that song keeps going generation across generation. And of course, changes, and some bird communities are wiped away. But if you just look at it in terms of the songs, some songs survive and some songs die out. And it's just like for me, and of course I'm an atheist, so I'll say evolution, you know how we are.
Sure.
But and I understand plenty of theists accept evolution too. They say it was part of the design, but or at least it's part of the grand plan. That's a whole other thing. But of course, as an atheist, I'm saying things just survive or they don't. I think the same thing for information. Information either survives or it doesn't, and then it gets passed on across generations. And of course, we're aware of that, and so we try to be in charge of what information survives into the future.
How far do we go as human beings in stopping somebody like Hitler, as you say, if there's no scorekeeper? Do any ends justify the means of stopping somebody like Hitler? Should we do anything that we can, even if it's maybe against our own internal principles about what we think of the world, that this is sort of an any cost kind of thing in order to get rid of somebody like Hitler?
Right. And, this is one of the things that I agonize over, because, I was in the Marines, and while I was never ordered to do something, like kill a kid or something, I understand that there's times in history where, like, say a family's trying to hide and the baby's crying. Does the mother stop the baby crying by suffocating it and protect the whole family? Or does she save the baby's life and then everybody gets killed? Those are real life decisions. In my mind, that sort of makes the case for what I believe, which is that chaos is in charge and what you do matters. And then you say, well, which one is objectively the right answer? I would say that the mothers who did suffocate the babies were part of families that kept going, and the mothers that didn't were not part of families that kept going. That doesn't make it right. I'm just saying that if chaos doesn't care, and if natural selection is just a matter of just, who's here and who's not, then that's just the way it is. And it sounds like I'm supporting that, or that I'm endorsing that as if it's a good thing. I'm as horrified by it as anybody else, but I just think that's the way it is. I think that's just the cold, hard reality that we live in. Yeah, so this is the heart of my ministry, because I was in the Marines, and there were times when we were ordered to, go take care of bad guys. And especially in Iraq, there were times when bad guys would go into people's houses, and specifically because they had families there, and they knew that we wouldn't just blow up the house, that we'd had to go in So even as Marines, which, a lot of people think of Marines as just heartless and we'll do what we got to do. Even as Marines, we agonized over this. How do we get rid of the bad guys and not deal with the good guys? Now, in this particular case, it's specifically targeting an infant, and that the free world comes into, is down to the free world, or not, whether or not we do this. In 1889, I don't know how I would have seen that. Right now, I think of it as like somebody having a time machine or something to give that.
I know,
order.
yeah, it's a time machine experiment, right?
Right. So yeah, and especially if I'm in charge, and so yeah, I was a staff sergeant in the Marines in Iraq. So there were times when my decision would make or break what we did. So if somebody had told me, it's hard for me to put myself in 1889, and especially in 2004 and 5 when I was in Iraq. If anybody told me to kill an infant, then I would have been required to raise the alarm. But I understand what you're trying to say here. 1889, you don't have that requirement. You just follow orders, and if you don't, you're executed.
Right.
Me personally, I wouldn't do it. I probably, knowing the Marines, and although I wasn't alive in 1889, just knowing the Marine mindset, I probably would have been promptly dispatched and dealt with, and somebody else would have done it. I just probably couldn't have done it. But I understand that, in the Marine mindset, you're supposed to take orders, and if not, there's consequences. For me, I couldn't fathom how poisoning an infant would lead to, the free world. And if there was like an all-knowing deity who's like, I know this is confusing to you, but this is important that you do it, it wouldn't make sense to me that he would put me in that position. So if I was religious, it wouldn't change my thought. I would just say, okay, I believe in you, but this doesn't make sense, so I'm not going to do it.
Okay. So to be fair, I'll answer it myself. I was in the Army.
Okay. Okay.
I'm with you. And I think even still today, there's a level of which if you're disobedient to a command in wartime, I think it's different for peacetime. But the consequences of disobeying a direct order are severe.
Right.
I set this up a little bit with the background that we both know what chain of command is, and we both know that our chain knows more than we do about what's going on, right?
I would just
sometimes maybe
right. Okay.
But
we could talk about a whole show about that.
We can do a whole show about what the chain of command knows and doesn't know. But suffice it to say, whether or not we agree with it, that they're in possession of a kind of knowledge that has led to this. This isn't a random situation, right?
Right.
There's boots on the ground here for a reason. We might not agree with it, but they have a reason for doing this. And you're thinking in your brain, why an infant?
Right.
Okay. Now you mentioned time machine, and we would have to introduce an element here that it would not be introduced in the natural world to sort of spoil the analogy here. But for me personally, I would say I couldn't do it, Richard.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it either. I don't know. I was never in a situation in combat, or I was never in combat, but we're trained to kill.
Yes.
And I know that it weighs heavy on a lot of Marines and Army soldiers and people who have been in the Army, that the PTSD is a very real thing, and it's a very serious thing. And I don't mean to make light of that by doing this. A lot of guys are in situations like this all the time. And maybe not quite this extreme or whatever, but the taking of a life is a serious thing, no matter what we're doing. So I would be scared. I probably wouldn't do it, and I would probably risk death because I wasn't doing it. So we would both fail in our mission, Richard.
Yes, I would.
We would fail in our mission. Okay, you guys, you failed your mission. Come back home, and we face the consequences, whatever that might be. Now, I'll pull back the veil and say why. You were probably wondering why April 1889.
I can guess.
What do you think?
Hitler.
Yeah. If you knew that child was Adolf Hitler. Now, this introduces an unnatural aspect to this. Now that you know who this child is, would you do it?
I still couldn't do it for two reasons. One, it's still a baby at the time. And two, the dangers of Nazism had a lot more to do than just one guy. There was an appetite there first, and this one guy stumbled into it and then had the capabilities to make it work for a while. We have that now. We have situations where there's a hunger and there's an icon, fortunately, who doesn't have the capabilities. He doesn't know how to run with that. But so Nazism had two factors. One guy who just wanted to be the guy and had a vision, and two, the audience that was excited about it. And then he had the capabilities and the power and the structure. A lot of that structure pre-existed him, but they suddenly were loyal to him. So killing one guy wouldn't make a difference. I think another type of Hitler would jump in and take advantage of that.
Let's say
for those two reasons, I couldn't do it.
Sure. Well, let's just say, analogy's sake, for the sake of that I guess maybe the fundamental question is, if you knew that your actions would prevent Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, would you do it? If you knew not assuming that somebody else would come along and do the same thing, but that you would actually by doing this, there wouldn't be a Hitler at all, and there wouldn't be a Holocaust. You're saving 6 million lives.
Right. For me, it's like the trolley thing, the philosophical thing.
1 or 6 million. Right.
Right. I get that, and I would just say I'm just still too weak to take the life of a baby. And also, I would say I understand how philosophers would put me in that position, but I couldn't understand how reality would put me in that position. So if I'm hearing you right, and I want to be fair, is that the objection? To some degree, is that the objection that you have with God's existence? Is that God wouldn't put you in that situation? Right, or at least the way I understand God, or at least the kind of God that makes sense to me, is the creator of all things, who had 14 billion years of exact fine tuning, all these cosmic things that had to happen just so we could be here, and even then, once we're here, a bunch of stuff that had to happen just so. That creator wouldn't even occur to him to put an adult in the position of whether or not to kill a baby to save other things. That whole trolley thing is a 100%. I once had Eric Hernandez say, "What's one thing that you're 100% sure of?" I'm 100% sure that this kind of thinking is human thinking, and it has nothing to do with what the kind of cosmic 14 billion year creator outside of space and time who loves us would ever do. I'm 100% sure of that.
Because I think in the analogy for me as a Christian, I look at I know you know the gospel, but I look at God giving his only son for the sake of, as John 3:16 says, the sake of the world, the cosmos, which is what the Greek is in that famous verse that you see, John 3:16. So God so loved the world, and that's the Greek for cosmos, which is the arrangement and the order of people within the world, that he gave his only son. And so in some sense you have in the Christian story Jesus taking the wrath of the Father upon himself. All the Old Testament wrath was poured out on Christ. You know that. I know that you know that.
Right. I'm familiar with that, yes.
Yeah. And so I would say one of the things that I became a Christian was because of one verse in particular that started me on the road to faith in Christ was Proverbs. It's trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. And it's not just sort of a blind obeisance to, okay, God, whatever, I'm not going to think about this, I'll just trust you without thinking. It was more of like, God is God and I am not. And so in the sense of, I know, people, I don't know where you are on this, but I know that people have objected to God's existence based on I think you did say it earlier about the judgment on other people with children involved.
Right. Yeah. And I just had a debate at ASU on that.
Yeah, I saw part of that a little bit, and I thought, so is that would you say that would be the primary reason that if God was going to judge a people, that he should spare the children in a sense?
Right. Well, I've said that the kind of God that I think would go through all that cosmic 14 billion year fine tuning to get to us now would have better ways to deal with it, so that. In fact, I imagine that God, and again, I'm projecting myself onto God, but man, aren't we all? Isn't all 8 billion people all this projecting ourselves? For all the people who say, hey, you can't, it's not you, it's God, they're doing the same thing. So like when they're like, hey, well, God's will was shown to us in this passage, they're doing the same thing. So I'm not too worried that I'm doing it. I really think I'm fairly analyzing what a 14 billion year deity, creator, fine-tuning, loving, knowing all of us would do. He wouldn't put us in that situation. He would say something like, hey, this village has to go, and I need to teach you guys how to take care of wrongdoers, especially wrongdoers who aren't listening and they're just rebelling and doing whatever. I'll take care of the kids. But by the way, this is an important point. there's a human value moral mandate that I've imposed upon all of you, all of my creations, that you are to treat each other as if the human life has value on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And write this down. This is important for divine inspiration. Put this in Deuteronomy 12, and then now you're going to go into the village. You're going to fight the adults. Don't worry about the kids and the moms. What's going to happen is I'm going to take them into another room, into another dimension. They're going to peacefully fall asleep. They're going to be in heaven. You'll never have to deal with that. But the wrongdoers have to be dealt with, and they need to know that humans are the kind of people who will right the wrongs, because I can't just be intervening all the time. You guys have to self-govern until you come up here. I'll take care of the babies, so that for two reasons. One, the babies are victims. The babies are victims. They're not part of this wrongdoing. They're victims. And then two, it's psychologically traumatic to impose that kind of mandate onto an adult to slaughter an infant. It's psychologically traumatic. And I wouldn't do that, because I've spent 14 billion years preparing for you guys. So for those two reasons, don't you dare harm the babies. I'll take care of them. Just deal with the wrongdoers. That's how I see that.
Okay, that's a good overview of your position. Do you think
that's my 100%? That's your
100%? Okay.
Yeah, he's like, you're so wishy-washy. Maybe there's a God. Maybe there's tell me something.
Give me a solidity. Okay, so
yeah, that's my.
Could God have? Is it possible in your view, your 100% view, that God, in taking the lives of the children of these cultures, brought them to Himself in eternity?
Right, and that's covered in my perfect where Richard is guide. He brings them into another dimension. The night before the battle, the moms and the babies go into another dimension. They peacefully go to sleep. They're in heaven, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, our husbands were wrong to do this, and we took part in it too." Oh my gosh,
Yeah, so God could save them.
Awful.
God could save
right.
them.
Well, God could save them, or He could just take them to heaven directly in another dimension outside of the combat, because the combat is ugly, as you know, and it's traumatic on the adults doing it, especially if it's just a little newborn.
Sure.
So, but however, as I study radicalized people who hate entire cultures, and they're like, cut them down to the and their lineage and their children's children and their children's children. That's a very human thing. So any kind of language where people are like, kill the babies too, that's 100% human thought. And by the way, there's Christian scholars who go along with that. There's people like Greg Boyd who say, okay, when you see that, that's their tribal instincts kicking in. The Bible was divinely inspired, but they brought this into it, and they shouldn't have. So it's not just an atheist saying this. I mean, there's Christians who are like, yeah, that's not something that God would command.
We'll stir a lot of spirited conversation at the club with your thoughts, and wrap up with this question, and we'll leave it with this. And we've been going a lot longer than I thought we would, but
we're passionate. We're both passionate.
Yeah, no, it's good to talk about these things and talk about them in a civil manner. Let's say God exists, and the God of the Old and New Testament exists. I mean, that Yahweh is believed to be Jesus incarnate, or Yahweh incarnate is Christ, and so the God of the New and the Old is one and the same. And I know a lot of skeptics object to the idea of the wrathful Old Testament moral monster God, kind of what we've been sort of talking about a little bit. If this God was real and was in Richard's universe and Richard's court of law, you investigated this individual. And the FBI, he was in human form. Yeah. What in Richard's court? What would you do to him?
So this is a person who's here on earth, sort of like Jesus, but he's also a representative of God, but he's in human form.
Yeah, I mean, he is, for example's sake, he is the God of the Old Testament who's come down and made himself available to your court of law. And this guy is allegedly guilty of, let's call them war crimes or whatever, or dehumanizing infants and women and all this stuff. What do you do in Richard's court of law?
So this is very similar to what we were just talking about. It's that perfect being putting me in this position where he's just kind of waiting to see what I would do. And it wouldn't make sense to me, but I could imagine us being under the power of a creator who's messing with us, or a series of powerful beings who are just messing with us. Like, this is sort of like the trolley problem, but we just want to see what you're going to do before we, mess with you some more. If I was in that position where I really believe this is a human who's submitting to my will, to my judgment, judicial system, but I also firmly believe that he could smite us, then I would not mess with him. I would say, okay, this is a very powerful creator, and I'm not going to establish my judicial system upon this person because I believe that he has the power to really harm us. And again, I'm not celebrating, I'm not worshiping this guy. This is more fear. I'm terrified of this person. And, so no matter what, I'm screwed. But at the same time, I'm not going to, this idea of, especially me being in the Marines, there's been times when I think the authorities maybe weren't being as wise as they could have been.
Sure.
Maybe just sort of messing with me, where I just surrender and say, okay, look, I can't do anything about this. But that's not a loving, worshiping, wonderful, inspirational situation. That's just sort of a sad situation.
Okay.
And so, and even then, that kind of speaks to itself. Like, why would something with that much power put me in that position? So, if not being in a cult is your goal, I think there's messages within Christianity. The verse about, look into your own eye before you judge others. The message is about how we're all intrinsically corruptible, and no matter who you are as a person, with the best of ideals, you can still be corruptible. These are messages that you can take to heart, so that if you're following something and you're excited about it and you're feeling righteous and you're suddenly seeing yourself do things and think things that don't seem right, these messages could be like a wake-up call to say, wait a minute, hold on, what am I getting involved in? Remember that I can be corruptible, even though I'm a good person. And a Christian would say, I'm trying to be a good person. However you square that. Even though it's not my intention to be this way, I am corruptible. And be able to look at myself before looking at others. Those are Christian messages that can keep you from falling into a destructive cult.